Hi, I'm Sarah.
And I'm Rena, and welcome to
Biopic, a podcast story. This is a podcast where we dissect the good, bad, ugly, and absurd of this specific genre of motion picture, the biopic. If you want to learn more about us, our scoring system, and how we choose movies, please check out our special introductory episode, Introduction, Who Are We, and What Are We Doing?
Sarah. What movie are we doing this week?
This week, we will be talking about Get On Up. And Rena, can you give us the trigger warning?
Yes, this movie contains images of violence, including violence with guns, misogyny, prostitution, bad parenting, child labor, racism, also employee exploitation. I left out emotional abuse.
That about covers it. And Rena, can you please give us the spoiler warning?
Spoiler warning. We are going to spoil everything, including possibly the major plot points of works of narrative art having nothing to do with this particular movie. Consider yourself warned.
Indeed. So some of the sources we used include articles in The Hollywood Reporter, in New York Magazine, and also the podcast A History of Rock Music in 500 Songs, episode 39 and 137.
Sarah, can you please tell us a little bit about James Brown and Get On Up?
Sure can. So, from our friends at Wikipedia, James Joseph Brown, born May 3rd, 1933, passed December 25th, 2006, was an American singer, dancer, and musician, the central progenitor of funk music, and a major figure of 20th century music. He is referred to by various nicknames, among them the King of Soul, the hardest working man in show business, Minister of New Super Heavy Funk, Godfather of Soul, Mr. Dynamite, and Soul Brother Number One. In a career that lasted more than 50 years, he influenced the development of several music genres. Brown was one of the first 10 inductees into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and his music has been heavily sampled by hip-hop musicians and other artists. The Wikipedia entry is long and complicated on this man, and I wasn't going to just read it out loud here. And then Get On Up is a 2014 biographical musical film about the life of singer James Brown. It is directed by Tate Taylor and written by Jez and John Henry Butterworth, produced by Brian Grazer, Mick Jagger, Taylor, and Victoria Pearman. The film stars an ensemble cast featuring Chadwick Boseman as Brown, Nelson Ellis as Bobby Bird, Dan Aykroyd as Ben Bart, Viola Davis as Susie Brown, Craig Robinson as Maceo Parker, and Octavia Spencer as Aunt Honey. The budget was $30 million and it made $33 million worldwide, so it broke even. This film, after it got out of development hell, demonstrates efficiency in a way that will further shame Cleopatra, which it deserves. So just a little background on the development hell that this was parked in. Beginning in 2000, and from the jump, Mick Jagger was attached as a producer. Spike Lee was originally going to direct it, and he almost got it off the ground in 2006, but rights and financing held it up. And I'm guessing somewhere in there involved a bunch of suitcases of cash that James Brown wanted that the film industry wouldn't issue to him. It was revived in 2012 when Jagger read an updated draft from the Butterworth brothers. The script takes a lot of liberties. Spike Lee left the project, and Tate Taylor was brought on. And Mick Jagger, again, stuck with the project, and Brian Grazer's Imagine Entertainment stuck with it to finance it. They shot this movie in 49 days.
7 weeks.
Yeah, I kept yelling at the screen for the benefit of no one. They did all of this in 49 days, I think, because of the Cleo hangover of 900 days, or however long that was. Tate Taylor is an interesting choice for director, and I'll get into him at some point. I think that he acquits himself admirably here as a director.
And I also wanted to throw in a shout out for Chadwick Boseman, rest in peace, who was such a great actor and was taken from us too soon. Out of the 15 motion pictures that he made, 5 were biopics, 3 were Marvel movies, and I will now take this moment to give praise for Marvel movies in opposition to Martin Scorsese. First off, I think it's a great test of an actor that they can deliver some of the dialogue they have to deliver in those things. And also that when they find a dramatic actor or an indie actor and make them a big deal, that actor then gets the ability to get more dollars and green lighting for projects that might not get made. But unfortunately, Chadwick Boseman never got to cash that check for being Black Panther. Civil War came out in 2016 or 2017, and then he was in Black Panther, Infinity War, and Endgame, but that was 2019. He died in August 2020, so first his schedule was full up, and then there was the pandemic, and then he died. And another thing that's incredible about him is where he's doing fight scenes, it's very physical in the Black Panther movies, and he had stage 3 cancer while he was filming, and I think only his family knew, but we don't know what other films he could have gotten made because he never got to cash that credibility check for being T'Challa.
I think you know that I side with my Lord and Savior Martin Scorsese on the Marvel thing. However, I do think that you make very good points here. He is electrifying in those movies, as he was in every single thing he made. And it's tragic that we lost him. He is kind of the John Cazale of our times, in that every time he was on screen in anything, you look at him and you can't take your eyes off him. And it's frustrating to think about what he could have done. He definitely made the most of every opportunity he did have and gave us some unforgettable performances, of which this is one. He did all of his own dancing for this, and he trained only for 2 months. And I say it like that because the moves he does in this film are bananas, and it's the kind of dancing people train for years to do.
Yes, and also Chadwick Boseman is lip syncing to live recordings of James Brown.
Yes. I was having a hard time figuring out what happened there, because he did do some singing, they say, and he trained to sing. I'm not sure if it's more like the Jim Morrison thing, where he was often lip syncing but sometimes singing, and that they were massaging his voice into some of the music. It's unclear to me how that worked out, but certainly it seemed mostly like lip syncing. And that's okay, because who wants to even try?
It was convincing, I thought. He did a great job lip syncing, and he also did the thing that I created the abandoned ego surrender category for, where if you can't sing as well as the person you're playing, just get really good at lip syncing. It was also fortunate in his case that there's the accusation that James Brown was more of a grunter than a singer. If it wasn't something where you needed to do something that had a ton of vocal chops, I can see how you can segue into it and still have it be effective.
I wonder if he was doing the grunting and then singing and then lip syncing. It's a mystery. To your point, this is why we had ego surrender, and I ruined it with my rating for Caligula. But this is a performance that is ego surrender in a lot of ways. He does not look like beautiful, beautiful Chadwick Boseman in this movie.
No. And as soon as he walks on screen, I'm like, oh, there's James Brown. I'm looking at James Brown.
He is much taller than James Brown. I'm guessing he was a gentleman's 5'5", which is to say probably 5'3". And Chadwick Boseman is 6 feet tall. Should we get into the movie?
Sure, Sarah. Let's get into the movie. One of the framing devices that they have at the beginning that they pick up toward the end. I know this came out about a decade after Dewey Cox, but they do something that Dewey Cox talked about, where they show someone toward the end of their career looking very like dramatically fraught, walking to the stage. And then in Dewey Cox, they have someone behind him say, where they're like, "Why is he so like caught up in himself?" And then they're like, he has to go on stage and sing a song that sums up his whole life and career and give an ultimate performance. And that is like they pick that thread up again at the end. And I did kind of feel that, but I'll allow it.
Yeah, we hit a bunch of stops on the road to Trope Town in this movie, but the structure of it is pretty inventive and serves the movie really well. I also, as I alluded to up top, before we even get further into this than we just did, there are multiple elephants in the room when it comes to James Brown. He abused drugs, particularly angel dust. He was very abusive, allegedly. He faced consistently throughout his life allegations and arrests for domestic abuse that would follow him into every relationship that he got in, including he went after Tammy Terrell with a hammer. There are a lot of messy legal issues, from theft to financial fraud to everything in between. It's wild how debased his personal life often was, and yet he had this astonishing gift, and he managed to kind of ride above the fray with it. He drew consistent admiration from other musicians and artists and the public, despite all of these things. I'll put it this way. I grew up in a household with People magazine, and he was constantly in People magazine. And this movie doesn't do the best job of addressing what a personally abusive monster he was in his intimate relationships. The structure of this film is kind of unique. It's a non-linear narrative structure. The story is told in kind of out of order chapters. It keeps moving in and out of time periods, and I'm making it sound really impossible to follow right now, but it totally isn't. It mostly works.
If you can process Pulp Fiction, you can process Get On Up.
Excellent. He also does talk to the camera sometimes.
When he talks to the camera, I enjoyed it a lot, because it's like he's taking the viewer into his confidence. I guess since we're just audience, he's bringing us in the way he wouldn't bring a person in. And I felt like in writing the script this way, they were thinking, let's throw a bunch of different storytelling element devices at the wall after we throw them in a blender, just to try to not follow regular biopic structure. It feels a little intentional, but I didn't mind.
The rule breaking in this movie does work really well and serve it for the most part. I'm going to say a lot of nice things about this movie. I will say up top, it is too damn long.
What would you cut?
You could trim down some of the musical performances. I don't know exactly. You know what I think I would cut? I would cut Alice and Janney, that whole sequence.
Where Alice and Janney and the husband, who I've seen in a bunch of comedy things, show up and they're being super racist, and then you see them getting down to the sound of the rehearsal outside. I liked seeing her. That was fun to watch, but yeah, I could see if you're going to make a more cohesive thing for running time.
I'm going to jump ahead and talk a little bit about the director of this movie, Tate Taylor. He made his directorial debut making The Help because he was a childhood friend of Catherine Stockett, who wrote that book. He was a working actor, not anyone who was getting famous, but he didn't have a lot of directorial skills when he came to that job. As I was watching this, I was realizing, and I did a little bit of research on him too, he's worked with Octavia Spencer 3 times. He's worked with Jessica Chastain a couple of times. He's worked with Viola Davis a couple of times. Alice and Janney was in The Help. He also shot this movie in 49 days. I have a lot of respect for what he did there. He has used his directing career, he made The Help before this. He could have probably picked just about anything to do next. And he chose a film that had been waiting on the shelf for a long time about a Black man. And he has consistently provided a platform for Black artists and female artists in his directorial career, which I respect that kind of allyship, using your power for good. Like I did come away from this realizing I was just being a dick. So anyway, sorry.
Anyway, so shall we go back to, it begins with the Dewey Cox walking down a hallway to give a career-summing performance where he's wearing a red suit.
Yes.
And
then we cut away to 1988, and I swear to God, this is the highest bar for the opening of a biopic I've ever seen, which is we see James Brown driving into an office park that he owns. There is, inside the office park, there is a sort of like a seminar going on, like one of those like I'm okay, you're okay seminars. We see a woman going to the bathroom where we find out that she poops. And James Brown walks into this office in his tracksuit. He's also been doing drugs at this point. But he walks into the office in his tracksuit. He goes to use the bathroom, sniffs, realizes what's happened in there, goes back to his truck, gets his shotgun, goes into the seminar, and demands to know who took a poo in his bathroom. I'm here, and this is amazing, and every other movie better open this way going forward. Rena, thoughts?
I've never liked toilet humor, but it is an example of him going all the way with being James Brown. And I like that the tracksuit looks like he's worn it a few times.
I do not like toilet humor ever. I feel really gross about even having said the word poo on this podcast. Yeah. But I gotta say, like, that sets a high bar for insanity. We then cut to 1968, where we see James Brown flying to do a USO performance in Vietnam, and he wants to bring the super heavy funk to them. He is wearing a magnificent suit. At this point, we also see his tendency to fine his band members and other people for cursing. This is before he found out about angel dust, just FYI. And they get shot at while they're flying, and the plane gets hit and it lands, but it's more crazy. And the general on the ground is apologetic, and James is kind of like, this wouldn't have happened to Bob Hope. And he says, yeah, just play for 20 or 30 minutes. And he says, nobody tells me where or when or for how long I can be funky.
I loved that line. That will be one of my choices for choice dialogue later on. And I think I wrote it down exactly, and it was, don't tell me when, where, or for how long I can be funky.
Then we cut back to 1939, and he is playing in the woods with his mother. We see right away that he grew up in just abject poverty. Like his dad comes back after being out for 9 days trying to make money, and he's got a mule. And we see right away, too, that his parents have a very violent relationship, and he's a witness to all of that. Then we cut to 1964, and he is in The Five Flames, and Dan Aykroyd is playing Ben. He was James Brown's manager up until his death, and is very good to him. I felt like he was always really straight with James and was supportive of him, but also really practical. We see him on the set of The Tammy Show, which was a concert film that was released by American International Pictures. It either meant Teenage Awards Music International and or Teenage Music International. He opens for the Rolling Stones at the Tammy Show. And also, you see that there are other people there like Jan and Dean and the Beach Boys. Like it's a huge, huge event.
And Frankie Avalon tries to talk to him and is super lame.
And James Brown is not super jazzed about the fact that he has to go on before the Rolling Stones. Ben assures him that no one's going to remember the Rolling Stones in 50 years. Of course, Mick Jagger produced this film. Obviously, James Brown had a huge influence on him. And James Brown tears the roof off the place and walks out of the scene with a mic drop. It seems like he's always dropping the mic. And just looks at Mick Jagger and says, "Welcome to America."
And he does all that while wearing a Christmas sweater.
I mean,
James Brown and his backup guys are wearing like red, puffy knit sweaters with like white snowflakes on them.
We go back to his childhood again, back in 1939 after that mic drop. And we see him walk underneath a man hanging from a tree, a black man, which has to be a pretty seminal moment in a childhood, and pretty upsetting to see. And we see his mom is trying to leave his father. And it seems like this isn't the first time she's tried to leave him. And his mom is trying to take him away with her. But his father draws a gun on her. She leaves him. And we also see here, as time goes on, that he's got like a straight up terrible childhood. And his dad is abusive. And his dad drops him off eventually with Octavia Spencer, who runs a house of sex workers. And he gets a job as a child bringing soldiers to the house of sex work and getting a cut of that money.
Yes. And what Octavia Spencer does is she rips a dollar bill in half and tells him he can have the other half if he brings more soldiers the next day, instead of giving him 50 cents that he could actually use.
And he also, at this point, we see him go to a church where he sees like a revival meeting, and this preacher imprints on him, where he sees the way that a preacher moves and dances. And one of the things that this movie does incredibly well is show us the elements of his life that impressed who he is upon him and created his persona. Seeing the way that preacher moved and how that influenced him, seeing the way, dealing with money would influence the way that he handled money going forward for the rest of his life. The screenplay and the direction does a really solid job of showing us how James Brown was made.
Yes, you see how some of this preacher's delivery style sounds like James Brown's delivery style. And I think these elements that he picks up come from things culturally that we're not familiar with.
So we cut to 1949, and James is busted stealing a suit out of a car. And he goes to jail for this after he is captured by the cops. It is a high-speed pursuit.
Yeah. So what's crazy, so stealing the suit did happen, but it was not the first time James Brown had stolen. He meets Bobby Bird in prison, and Bobby Bird gets his family he hears James Brown singing, and Bobby Bird gets his family to take James Brown in so he can sing with his group, which is extraordinary. And you see them all sitting around having dinner together, and he talks about how lucky he is to have gone through all this and to be sitting here eating the fried chicken and the cornbread. And then he hits on Bobby's sister.
Oh, he does more than hit on her.
Uh-huh. And Bobby never gets on his case about it.
We see right away that James is a natural performer. And he's super dynamic and a great singer. And then we are out at a club listening to music, and they are seeing Little Richard perform. And I personally, I mean, I'll never be called upon for this. I'm fairly confident when I say that. Would never want to play Little Richard because he's a genius. But the actor who does play him, an actor named Brandon Michael Smith, is really, like, he makes such an impression in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, and I appreciated that they don't feel a need to circle back to Little Richard, because sometimes people are in your life, briefly make an impact and go. They hear him sing, then they grab the stage while Little Richard is out taking a smoke break, and then Little Richard takes James Brown back to the place where he's flipping burgers and talks about how to start getting your records played, where he tells him to rob a liquor store, get $100, press some copies, and send them to DJs.
And he also tells him that the devil is white and in a fancy suit. And truer words, my friend.
Oh.
Little Richard also cues up a scene that I could probably talk about for 100 years. He asks James, "What happened to you?" And we cut to a sequence that it shocked me, where we see a line of children, of black boys, shirtless, and they're all getting numbers painted on their chests and getting black folds tied over their eyes. And already I'm like, what is going to happen? And we see them getting their hands tied behind their backs. And what they're doing is having these young children fight each other blindfolded for entertainment at a country club. And I guess I have a really weird kind of piece of praise that I'm about to offer, and I hope that I can clarify why I mean it as a compliment. I felt so unsafe and so destabilized watching this scene. And that is, I think, the highest praise I can give any part of filmmaking. Bob Fosse did this incredibly well. Jordan Peele does it really well. And I mean, pretty much all of Nope is a movie that makes you feel unsteady, and you feel like threatened by it. Like, the best movie making can bring this out in you when art is so kind of like, it's confronting you and making you uncomfortable, and you don't know what's going to happen, and you feel kind of sick. And seeing those little boys getting blindfolded and numbered to fight each other made me feel so unsafe, because I didn't know what they were going to do to these children. And we know that James Brown saw a lot of traumatic stuff growing up. So I was afraid.
It's showing a devaluation of humanity, and I guess I didn't clock the expressions on the musicians' faces, but I did see all the repulsive white country club people just like cheering from the balconies, and they were all so ugly.
On these circumstances, we didn't see any white person feeling sort of like, oh, I don't know if this is a good thing. Like, we just saw the disgust on their faces and the resignation that they had to keep playing. You see him get knocked to the canvas, and you see his eyes shut because he has been, knocked out, or, like, just made, like had the lights knocked out of him for a moment. And then you see his eyes divert over to the band, and they start playing a signature James Brown beat. that gets him back up off the ground and back into the fight. And then he wins it. And it's strange and it's upsetting and it's propulsive and it's a really amazing bit of filmmaking. This was the point where I thought, oh, I understand why James Brown is James Brown. I understand why he pulled a gun on a white woman using his toilet. I want to be clear that I don't like or agree with the choices that he made in terms of his relationships, particularly the fact that he was a lifelong domestic abuser, and I'm not excusing it. But when you see like this kind of trauma, or it went totally untreated, you understand how that ugliness contributed to more ugliness.
And he is ugly to people.
Yes.
He is constantly trying to prove that he does not need love.
Then we meet Ralph Bass of King Records. He also meets Ben for the first time. Together, the label and Ben determined that they need to rename the band to James Brown and His Famous Flames. And James, to his credit, insists that they keep the Famous Flames in the name, but they straight out tell the rest of the group, we don't need you. We need James Brown.
Bobby stays with him. Bobby knows that he's latched onto something special, and I think he just wants to be there for the ride.
And the record label is shockingly racist in a way that, obviously, like, everybody was racist in the 50s, but just right to his face, which surprised me. And James says to his manager, I want to record live. I want to be a showman, basically. He talks about the suit that he wants to be wearing and what his backup band is going to be wearing and what the dancers are going to be doing. And he really, you see how all of the showmanship he has experienced in his life up until now is all kind of coalescing into this image that he wants to create. And this is when he kind of launches the Mr. Dynamite era.
Yeah, and then we come to a scene that will be circled back to later where he meets his mom again. She comes backstage to see him, and he asks her about why she left. It turns out she's in Brooklyn, and he gives her $100 and tells her to go away. And
this was
need anyone.
This was agonizing. And it was such good acting.
Yeah. And then, just because I love spoilers, what happens much later, circle back and they see Bobby comes into the room, and they show Bobby comes into the room and that James is devastated. And he tells Bobby, make sure she's taken care of. And it reminds me of a line that I heard somewhere when I was a kid. I can't identify where it came from, but it stayed with me. And I was too young and too sheltered to comprehend it, but I understood it to be something that could be a fundamental truth for others, even if it wasn't my particular truth. And that line was, sometimes it's possible to love another person very much, but not be able to stand being around them. And that dynamic between people can happen because maybe they're related, but they've evolved personalities that are like oil and water and don't really mesh well in the time they spend together because there's nothing beyond common memories. Or because there's too much hurt and because they know if they're around each other too much, they're going to hurt each other again. And that's it. Sometimes it's possible to love another person very much, but not be able to stand being around them. I don't know where I got it from, but it stayed with me, and I thought of it when I saw this scene.
We also find out that there was an incident when he's pandering / recruiting, and he sees his mother at one of the parties that they have there when there's people in town and there's sex to be had, and his mother denies him.
It's just brutal. And you see, like, Viola Davis, and it's like she can reunite with her kid, or she can eat and get a few drinks.
There's so much in that scene where you see them talking back and forth, and you see Chadwick kind of convey this hurt and this anger, and also like sense this almost like this wanting to maybe even reconnect with his mother, and the sense at the end that he's got to push her away because he doesn't need anybody. James Brown doesn't cry. And it's really incredible work from these two actors. We're in 1965, and he is now the hardest working man in show business. We see how James does everything in cash. We see him get draped in the cape by Bobby. This is, of course, a very famous thing that is continues in James Brown shows for time immemorial, where at the end someone comes out and puts a cape over him and he'll rise up. And we see that he saw that on the preacher circuit, just sort of like that piece of showmanship. And we also get a new wife in Jill Scott, who shows up in this film and is always delightful to see. And
one of the things that Chadwick Boseman gets right is showing how the personality that James Brown projects gets more and more pronounced, because in the earlier scenes, like the jailhouse, there's a little of that there, but you see like how the style of speech, the beginnings of referring to himself in the third person, where that comes from and how it gets more and more stylized, and how that persona kind of ossifies as time goes by.
We come to a scene where we see that he's handing out Christmas gifts and little like candy and whatnot to people in their neighborhood. And there's a man getting an eyeful down Jill Scott's outfit. And oh boy, does the movie take a turn right now. You see Jill Scott go flying across the room and into a table, and you hear James screaming at her about letting another man look at her. And this is the only time we really see his storied domestic violence career. And I feel different ways about this. I feel like the film kind of whitewashes his abusiveness, but also I don't want to watch him abuse women for 2.5 hours either.
Yeah. Would I rather watch James Brown sing and dance or watch James Brown beat up women?
It leaves an impression, but I also feel like they really like didn't address it as fully as it was a problem for him. It was a problem for him his entire life. He walks right up to the camera after this, and it's a great little bit of face acting from Chadwick where you see the shame and like he got caught, and the defiance in his face. It's an interesting moment.
I think going to that level of being ashamed and showing the shame, but also showing the violence. Again, that is surrender on the part of the actor to not need to make us love the character, but to just be them. But it also reminds us the actor is their character's lawyer. And they have to take that representation as a defense lawyer does, where you go into it believing you have to represent your client as if they are innocent, but when you're an actor, you're also showing the guilt, but you're showing the humanity.
We start to take the local bus through Tropesville at this point, where we see James being really abusive to his band and his band confronting him about that.
Yeah, and is exacting a high degree of professionalism. Like, James Brown had ways of signaling to his musicians while dancing on stage that he was docking them another $5. And then another $5 and another $5. They tell him, like, we don't want any of this anymore. And then they all leave, except for Bobby, who stays with him again. Because Bobby, despite the whole business with his sister, has not hit the limit yet.
Yeah. And then we get to 1968 and they're recording, and we find out that Martin Luther King has been shot, which is, of course, very sad.
So how many times have we seen MLK die in a movie now? I think this is the second.
I think this is just the second. It won't be the last.
It won't. Like, certainly there have been other films that took place in that time, but I don't think they included MLK dying. And
yeah.
It wasn't. But he has a concert that night in Boston. And they talk the mayor into letting them have it, and they show how he prevents a riot.
One thing they don't show is how they were going to televise it on public television in Boston, in order to hopefully encourage people to not go out into the streets angry. And James Brown was very unhappy with that, and he demanded $60,000 to make up for what he presumed would be lost ticket sales, and also because they were broadcasting. And I was reading about this incident, and somehow they found the money. I don't know where they found $60,000 in cash in that short of a period of time, but they worked it out. I think Whitey Bulger was out of prison at that point. And the scene that follows this, where he records I'm Black and I'm Proud with the children, is great. It's really entertaining and sweet. Then we take another turn in 1968, and we see that Ben, his manager, has died, and it's very sad. And we see that James is super unmoored by his death. This is another point where I'm going, let's move this along, because we're seeing all the conflicts happen. Bobby Bird, he wants to go do his own thing, and James is so far up his own ass that he cannot even believe that anyone would deign to leave him, and he accuses him of, wanting to leave so he can rip off James Brown and do like the lesser James Brown around the country. And and he does quit. He does walk away.
But this was an evolution on Bobby's part, because part of why he's stuck with James was because he said about himself, that he knows he's not a front man. And this is like, he's slowly evolved to the point where he can do something on his own, but it's a subtle character.
This is another point where this movie just demonstrates how agile it is at threading that needle of making us understand James Brown without making him sympathetic. I don't have sympathy for him beyond the way that I feel bad for anyone who never had a chance.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of like having a functional relationship with the world and where they sit in it. I feel empathy for people like that. And I feel empathy for James Brown, but I'm also like, yeah, but you also did a lot of damage, my friend. Um, and I think that the structure kind of enables us to do that too. I don't feel like a straightforward format biopic would have worked because there really is no redemption arc when all is said and done.
No, he needs somebody to shove.
Yeah. And thank goodness we cut back to the office park. I'm so excited to be back in the office park. Again, greatest framing device I've ever seen in a movie. And he is now in a high-speed police chase. This is the anti-OJ police chase. Um, there are guns drawn. It is violent. He has used his truck to ram things in order to get away, and they are pulling guns on him. And then Trope Navajo shows up, and I didn't see it coming because this movie was so unpredictable. He looks over and he sees his parents in the police car. Boy, are they disappointed in him.
I don't think they have any right to be disappointed in him because it seems like the kind of thing that would have happened to them.
And then when he finally gets overtaken by the police, he gets out of the car, but you know who gets out of the car? Little James Brown. Again, snuck up on me, didn't see it coming.
Inner child, no. No.
We see him in jail again now. Obviously, he went to jail for all of this.
That was just so not subtle. Like, yeah, I'm gonna do angel dust and run around with this gun and plow into these cop cars. I mean, he is not good at running from the police. He did not learn his lesson, and it's happening on a dirt road that looks exactly like the road where he ran up that hill with the suit.
Like, where he is consistent in his inconsistency is that he is a consummate showman.
Yeah.
You know, he didn't do anything run of the mill to get arrested. He went into the office park. He yelled at people for pooping in his toilet. He aimed a shotgun at the ceiling. And then he drives away in his truck and is chased by cops. I mean, hats off to you, James Brown. You never make a boring story.
No.
We see him in jail trying to kind of talk himself through this situation. And then we see him reconnecting briefly with Bobby Bird, who seems like he has a great life.
A thing I appreciated here, we talked about costumes being costumey last week. Everything that everyone wears here, even when they're being fabulous, it looks like they've worn it a few times, which is real. Like, the grit is real. Bobby Bird's bathrobe looks like a bathrobe he's had forever.
Yeah.
And they talk about how great it is that they have a white guy cleaning Bobby Bird's pool now, which is fantastic inversion of Green Book. White guy shows up to clean the pool and then goes away.
It's a good scene because it isn't like the hug and I've changed and I'm better now, because he's not better and he was never better. He doesn't seem to have the ability to apologize, but he does call him Mr. Bird, and we know throughout this movie that he has, you know, asked to be addressed as Mr. at various points, and it is a sign of his respect for him.
Yeah, and when you see that scene where Bobby and his wife Vicky are sitting in the audience and James Brown is singing, like, Bobby is directly in his sightline, and you feel like he's not singing to some woman, he's singing to Bobby. And that's like the closest he's ever gonna get to saying, "I love you, man." And that's what he was walking out for in that suit from the beginning in the Dewey Cox framing device.
Yeah, and I thought though, as much as this is a cliched thing in the biopic, I liked the way they did this because we had been seeing everything kind of come together in such a nonlinear fashion, and we see all of these different eras of James Brown kind of rolling up in order to kind of lead us to this moment in 1993. I thought it was effective, as much as it's a cliched thing. The way that they kind of inverted it and put it on its head was smart, and I liked it.
Yeah, and I guess we didn't mention in there that one of the things he's reacting to when he goes and shoots in the office park is that this is around when his son Teddy has died. And James Brown had lots of children, but just because you have tons of children doesn't mean that they're all like per kid a fraction less dear than if you only have one.
Yes, I've been made to understand that the love is exponential. Like you love each of them. Um and everything I've heard. So yeah. So we have this roll up moment where we see all of this, and he says, I paid the cost to be the boss, to the camera.
And then you see the little kid version of him saying that. And I appreciated that. I felt like that is the non-cliched reunion with the inner child that Rocket Man couldn't manage.
At no point are we on a redemption arc. And it's unsentimental how they frame this, because he's kind of like, this is who I am. I am a mess, and I am kind of a bad person.
Yeah, and you see the kid like walking along, slapping things with a stick, saying James Brown, James Brown, and you see that young version of him in prison, and all of the versions of him and people around him saying James Brown, James Brown. And what I found myself thinking was, he made the world his cheering section. To that thing of the artist who, for one reason or another, can't accept love and needs it from the audience. He made the whole world cheer James Brown, James Brown.
And we see him sing to Bird and him start crying, and they seem to have reached a peace of sorts in life. Apparently Bird would go on to occasionally perform with him again. But he seemed like he had, fully self-actualized and was pretty happy in his life. This closed with like the montage of all of the things that James Brown did, which was accomplish a great deal. Like, he's a hugely influential artist. I think we can kind of get to closing thoughts once we go through our scores and everything. But first, do we have any choice dialogue?
I did. I had 3 things that I wrote down. Which were, don't tell me when, where, or for how long I can be funky. We're a gospel group. This is R&B hair. And in memory of last week, Little Richard said, I'm going to be bigger than Cleopatra.
I mean...
Okay. Did you have any choice dialogue?
I did. I want to go back to Little Richard's scene where he said, that is when the devil come, and he ain't going to be red with no fiery tail. He's going to be white in a fancy suit.
That's great.
And also the ones that you named too. I mean, just the just constant mic drop of a human.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, should we get into our rankings?
Yeah, let's rank this. So for outward appearances, hair, makeup, I gave it a 9.
Same.
For acting, casting, I gave it a 10. There were just too many OGs in this, bringing an A game for me to not give a 10.
Same. Same. I just perfect casting and really incredible acting.
For passage of time, I gave a 7.
I gave it a 10 because I love visual cues and that I like dates on screens, and they kept giving me that. And also, in addition to me being kind of dumb and needing those breadcrumbs, they also did a wonderful job kind of changing the look and feel of scenes, as well as really altering the costumes and people's appearances to indicate passage of time. I thought across the board, I always knew where I was.
For costuming, I gave it a 9.
Same. Costumes looked great. They were both accurate to James Brown and his performances, as well as you mentioned, things looked lived in, they looked real.
Mm-hmm.
And they all looked good. Quality of the script, I gave it a 7. I think the Butterworth brothers they're incredibly talented writers. And I think that they do what they do extraordinarily well. But I'm dinging it for the depiction of James Brown because they I don't care for the way that like the domestic violence was glossed over. But the structure of this was brilliant and I loved it. And even though the movie goes to some really dark places, it still is whitewashing so much of his life, which is a really screwed up thing to say. But I thought that the way that this all kind of came together was really well done.
So for quality of the script, I gave it an 8. I guess similar reasons, but I thought that so much of the dialogue was quite entertaining and everything sounded plausibly like something like things those people could have said in conversation in private life. For accuracy, I gave it a 6.
I gave it a 5.
So for storytelling, was it cliched? Was it interesting? Was it inventive? I gave it an 8. I appreciated it that they, and yes, to a degree, it felt like they were thinking, let's do things to defy expectations of this genre and throw it at a wall and see what sticks. But it worked for me for the most part that they did that, even though I could see that they might have been thinking about it. So 8.
I gave it a 9. I loved the structure of this. It's possible for him to be as complicated as he was in this movie.
Yeah. It's a tour de force and amazing work from Chadwick Boseman. We can't overpraise him. He was a great actor who should have had that opportunity to make more films.
Production value, I give it a 9.
Me too. Wow. Production and direction decision making, I gave it a 9 again because I appreciated all of the choices that they made.
Yeah, same level. I gave it an 8. 49 days.
Yeah, that's amazing.
49 days in budget.
For Do We Care, I gave it an 8. It kept me invested in learning about this horrible person, but a lot of that 8 was for the part of it that's Bobby Bird's journey, how he hangs on to this very difficult friendship for the magic of it, and that kind of detente they come to at the end,
Yeah,
where
I gave it a
you'll
7.
okay. So my tally comes to 8.3. What's yours?
Okay, let me do some math here. Um, 8.3 also. Um, because we had such a high number of 8.3, it is now time for us to do second opinion, which we blatantly ripped off from How Did This Get Made?
I'll read the first one, Sarah.
Okay.
So, the first review, 1 star out of 10, titled Definitely Not for Everyone, was written by Dejan 210922. Oh, no, their name is Dejan 2109 on March 22nd of 2019. And they wrote, very strange movie. Unfortunately, I wanted to find out more about this artist. Unfortunately, I wanted to find out more about this artist, but after 25 minutes, get it up from my bed and turn off video.
Why is it unfortunate that he wanted to learn more about James Brown?
I
That's my
don't know. He could have learned more by watching the rest of the movie.
while there is, while there is some fiction in this movie, it is about no one except James Brown. And if you find out anything in this movie, you find out about James Brown.
Yeah.
Do we think that they were trying to make a joke? Like, I feel like this review could have gone better if they said after 25 minutes, I had to get on up from my bed and turn off the video. Do you think they were trying to do that and failed?
I think this is a bad, no, Sarah, I think this is a bad pun.
Oh, it's a terrible pun because it fails. It doesn't make sense. The movie's name isn't Get It Up, it's Get On Up.
Yeah, I agree with you. This is not a good pun.
This is not a good review.
The next one, can you read this next one that I found from January 11th of 2015?
Sure thing. Title: Too Much Tate Taylor, Not Enough James Brown, from Ryan TD 2006. Great acting. However, Tate Taylor knows very little about James Brown. What he learned about JB, he framed in Hollywood glitter. This film was short-sighted. This was a poor attempt. Tate was more concerned with his skill as director than the story of James Brown. The music of James Brown should have been closer to the center of the film, and instead it was used as a background music for the director's scenes. In no way did the audience get the feeling that JB was the hardest working man in show business. Tate showed us a Hollywood fantasy where James Brown was destined for greatness. No, JB was not. In the post-slave trade South, he was destined to die a nobody. James Brown was the hardest working man on planet Earth. That's how he made it into show business. Portraying JB at Portraying JB in the destined for greatness Hollywood fairy tale diminishes the sweat from his brow and the blood in his veins. Show me on the doll where Tate Taylor touched you, Ryan.
Yeah, I feel like this is the opposite of the film that I saw. Tate Taylor was not on camera at any time. And you had said that one of the things you would do for running time is take a little bit out of the musical sequences. There are lots of live concert films of James Brown if you just want to watch James Brown singing and not a life story of James Brown.
Um,
And also,
it's,
hardest working man on the planet is rather hard to quantify. Yeah, can I read the next one?
yeah.
Okay. James Brown was not a proto-capitalist monster by Polyamorph on November 15th of 2014. Chadwick Boseman plays James Brown throughout as strong-willed and highly aggressive, egocentric, with no emotional developments or any emphatic insights. The personality of real-life James Brown has been a lot more complex, I'm certain. The real man was quite deep. Just watch an original video and focus his facial expressions. This is very different to what Boseman played. He shows us someone who acts like he was a stupid and aggressive teenager, hiding his personality behind playing strong forever. The movie pervertedly interprets James' life as supposedly heartless profit machine. Why is that currently incredibly stupid movies about black music are issued? Is there a plan behind this? Or did the supposedly American way of life, Machiavellism, I think they meant to say Machiavellian here, but whatevs, infected all film people to the full and made them stupid and ill at heart. Strangely enough, many facts of James' life are highly changed, probably to and heighten James' life to a more heroic level. For what? The way he was, as a real human being, he was great enough and better than the proto-fascist monster he is depicted as the movie. Or is the trouble just that Mick Jagger, who financed the movie, thinks that everybody in music business has the same kind of personality type like he has? James Brown was a capitalist and seems to have been quite proud to be one. That was his whole thing. Like, he wanted that money in cash. He was taking back for himself what had been denied him based on the accident of history and society and where he was thrown down.
He was a straight up job creator. Like all those people on stage with him. And there were dozens of them. There were people dancing.
The last review, written by Curious Jasmine on November 28th of 2015, is called I Only Gave It 2 stars because I was able to finish. This film isn't quite as bad as Gigli or other movies I could never find it in me to complete, but bad enough for you to question your judgment for picking it up in the first place and to rejoice when it's finally over. It was outlandish, yet isn't categorized as a comedy, which is the saddest part of all. Maybe it is due in part to not being a James Brown fan, but this movie just dragged out to me and made James Brown look like a bully and a minstrel character who happened to strike it rich because music surrounded him and he already had a knack for it. The film takes you from the time James was a child to him as a teen and then shows him in the industry.
I mean, did everyone see a different movie?
I think that winds up being our conclusion with a lot of these things.
Yeah. I mean, like way harsh with the Gigli mention. That is an act of aggression to bring that movie into the conversation.
Agreed. outlandish yet isn't categorized as a comedy, but they also don't seem to have found it funny.
What part of it was supposed to be funny and wasn't? Was it when his dad almost shot his mom? Was it?
What a world. So, shall we outro?
If you liked the show, please leave us a 5-star rating and subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And tell a friend, or better yet, plural friends, and share us on social media. We hear it helps.
Tune in next week when we'll be talking about Gotti, starring John Travolta.
Be ready to count the number of producing credits in the opening credits. That is the spoiler I will give you.
Everybody,
and with that,
a great week.
And have a great week.
Tuesday.